Beginning in 3, 2, 1. Hello everyone, and welcome to another video from Keobastein. I once again have my co-host CommDao. So let's go ahead and get started because we have some things to talk about. But before we go further, how are you doing, my friend?
Keobastein, I am doing good, and I am trying to hydrate after the summer heat.
Ooh, yeah, the summer heat is quite beating down. I live in Florida, so thankfully we have an overcast, so it hasn't been too hard on us. But it's funny that you mentioned overcast because I actually picked the stage for our background, which is from Waka Waka 7, and it definitely has, well, a very hot sun background. But enough of that. So the reason we are doing the video today is because we have a video that has recently came out from the one known as Qmanchu, and that video is called The Unfortunate Consequence of Modern Controls. So to go ahead and give our listeners what we're talking about, this video basically is from a content creator who does seem to be doing fighting games. I actually became aware of the video of I became aware of their content with their other most recent video, active defense and fighting game, which I have become a fan of, since it kind of highlights how there needs to be more interaction between players and how they kind of frame it as a conversation, which, to be fair, many other content creators have said that fighting games are a conversation between one or two opponents. But they also kind of highlight why current fighting games, when they have diminished the defensive mechanics, it also diminishes the conversation. So their analogy and whatnot, I am a fan of. So when I heard about this other video called The Unfortunate Consequence of Modern Controls, I was a bit maybe interested to see, like, oh, well, maybe they got a talking point that may be a bit more nuanced, and then the general talking point of other content creators that's just like, well, they're just making these for casuals and we just don't like it, thus it's a problem. And after watching their video, it's kind of sort of the same drum. They do put more elegance and basically say, well, here are the potential pitfalls of how they handle modern controls. And I see where they're coming from, but I still also see it from like, how should I say it? I actually want to say maybe a glass ceiling, because the problems that they highlight, it seems like a problem that's only for him, and I even dare say small set few of people, personally, in my opinion. But before I go any further, do you get a chance to watch that video yourself or take any glean from it, CommDao?
I did, and I agree with you where the first third of it, or like the introduction, where he sets up his premise where he says, it's not an issue about being more accessible. Something that you and me talk about is like being consumer friendly, getting more casuals into the scene. So there's nothing wrong with having the options. And it's like, okay, I'm following along with him. But the further he goes, like his main takeaway feels like it's skipping a beat, or it's like he's jamming the conclusion into like a way that most other people wouldn't go with it. Like he focuses too much on one particular aspect, where I think there are fans of fighting games who like high execution, big character expression, super complex methods and input flows and all that stuff. But I don't think what he's saying about modern controls is like they're not at odds with each other with the way he lays it all out. Like it started off with like, okay, like let's see where he's going, let him cook, and it's like, oh, like he's cooking on a barbecue in like a completely different state, it feels like, if that makes sense.
I think I got an idea. For me, here's the thing that made me want to like actually take a look at this video, and where I may have some criticism, or how about this? I agree with some of his logic, but not so. No, I agree with his conclusion that there are some unfortunate circumstances or results for the basically doing modern controls in a game, but our logic is there. Like we both have the same thing. Like actually, if I may, I actually don't actually think highly of Street Fighter 6 modern mode. Same thing with say the rules, what we'll call it, smart style and whatnot. I think it's called smart style. Like I'm actually not a fan of those. designs, but we come from like a different context. Like, he likes these designs if it pushes players to go towards playing traditional, because in City of the Wolves and Street Fighter 6, their modern controls, they actually handicap the player by actually not giving them more or less the full capability and tools to engage with the game. It's like, okay, we gave you a simple, or rather an accessible way to control or interact with our game, but there's some caveats, there's some handicaps, like the one how you mentioned how in Ultimate Marvel will do some specials for you, but you have no ability to do throw. And Street Fighter 6, you actually lose out on a few normals, few character normals, or when you use modern controls. And I am highly against this practice because this is your handicap players. So, and these characters, this competitive game is designed with these characters to have all these tool sets in mind, not in the mind of, well, we give you some tools, but you're going to be handicapped by not having these or that tools and whatnot. So that's handicapping the player from trying to engage with a competitive product with like I said, the word handicap. I don't think I need to go to work further than with the type thing of a handicap. But then not only that, if the goal is to also to get people to be on board to teach and learn, you're still not even really giving them the teaching method. You're just basically giving them an experience that they're not going to be able to relate to when they do go from modern to traditional and whatnot. So I've never really been a big fan of games doing this halfway practice. I'm in the camp of, if you want your game to be traditional input, then be all traditional input. If it's going to be modern, be all modern. This is why I am a fan of like Blade Stranger, Phantom Breaker, and Fantasy Strike, because these games like, all right, we design our games with modern mode in mind, so no player is getting a different experience from another based off their skill set. It's just rather, did you learn how the game play and then go with that. Now, there have been some games that have done some modernization to try to get people in there. Personally, I don't think Grand Blue Versus has done a great job, as some people say. But you know what? Let's say that's at least slightly better, because no one is being handicapped outside of the fact that in Grand Blue Versus Rising, you have a guard button, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, you can use the guard to do guard and low, just like people can also do the back to guard. However, if you want to do instant block, which, to be fair, it does not have a strong presence, but you can never instant block with the guard button. You can only do that with the backwards, like pressing it on the traditional method. So because that exists, I still look at that like, okay, that still really isn't, that's still basically keeping it bare between the two players. Now, again, I'll admit, in Grand Blue vs. Rising, it is kind of a minuscule state. Did I say minuscule? Let me just say, it doesn't have such a prevalent influence between the two players. But I guess the reason I'm saying this is because I like where, if a game is going to do both traditional and modern controls, I want the disparity between the two to be as minimal as possible. And the game I'm going to say that does it the best currently, in my opinion, is actually Merfight from Matt. I'm not sure if you played that game before or heard of it, but Merfight, I think that's the game that does better with the modern controls as well as doing traditional inputs and whatnot.
So how do they do it in that game? Because like I am familiar with it. Like I think I played the demo like very briefly, but I don't remember any like big significance with the inputs in that game.
Yeah, so like for starters, that game actually does have charge input, so you're allowed to do charge input by just doing back and forward and the attack, back forward, like a la MK style. Now, charge characters tend to, there's like a slight difference. Actually, no, I don't think there really even much of a difference. It's rather, one could just be done instant, and the one that's done by charge, I think sometimes there may be a slight property or maybe damage, but otherwise, like command grabs or other moves, they could be just done with a button and pressing towards or whatnot. And the difference that the game does is not their property change, not their damage. The difference is the meter bill you have. Like from a top, and how the game handles its meter system, like from a top player, yeah, they're going to want to optimize their combos to do traditional input to build their meter quicker and faster. But I'll say from a casual, even starting off, they basically won't need to look at or worry about that. And even then, while I admit the meter options are strong, they also aren't encompassing of, well, if you don't have meter, you're in a checkmate scenario, like Guilty Gear, if you will. So I like how it was subtle enough, like, okay, for people who are not execution heavy, they can still do the commands, they can still interact with the characters, they're still learning the character as the character is. The only thing they'll lose out is the meter build and whatnot. Like, basically, if you do the easy special, you just don't get any meter for doing the special at all. While people who do the traditional input, they do the dual command meter build from most of the fighting games do and whatnot. Like, that level is so minuscule because I had never seen entry level to someone starting off being like, hey, how do I make sure I have meter to do things? Like, that's not something that's in their current initial peripheral and whatnot. And even then, when I even asked the top players of the plane that, like, you know, what's the disparity between a person who does the optimal combo for meter build and the one who just used the traditional input, they're like, the disparity is so minuscule that you're not really handicapping yourself. You'll have some challenges, but it's not much as of a handicap as opposed to Street Fighter. Oh, I don't have Honda's large heavy kick because I'm in modern mode. Like, I basically just lose out on a complete tool set, which means a modern Honda and a classic Honda from Street Fighter 6 is a complete different experience.
Right. So for you, whenever you're looking at classic versus modern controls, right, you're looking at the trade-off and the possibility of someone who's starting off with modern eventually, quote unquote, graduating to classic controls, right? Like, is that where, like, kind of your heart and passion on the matter is here?
No. Not necessarily. No. I mean, I'm in the camp of, if a game's going to go one way, it needs to go completely one way and just design its game with that way and whatnot.
Gotcha.
Like, that's kind of where I'm at. And Street Fighter trying to do this middle ground with its modern mode, because it doesn't commit to it, like, let's go there. One, Street Fighter 6 is designed with traditional inputs in mind. Like, that's what that game is designed. That's why majority of players are still played with traditional inputs. And the fact that some people even say certain modern characters kind of somewhat succeed better than traditional because of the fast pace, that just shows basically the instability of Street Fighter 6. And I think that's actually the one thing I kind of want to get to a harder matter. I know we're kind of going a bit winded, but I've never been a big fan of the fighting games of using Street Fighter as a template of what a fighting games be. The fighting games genre, or I'd say the community, is still in the stranglehold of whatever Street Fighter 6 does, that's the way it needs to be doing. When I look at fighting game pillars such as like excuse me, what's his name? I can't think of his name. James Chen, who I used to normally admire.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, James Chen, who I normally admire, because he was one of the few people who was doing FAQs back in the early days for people to learn the game. He's stagnant in the fact that we can't have games with button special, because then no one will ever be able to then anti-air will be basically people will always anti-air and whatnot, even though we have games where, once again, people still can't anti-air as effectively because, or how do you let me correct that, the game changes itself around, like he basically looking at the scope of, oh, we can't have a button dragon punch, because a dragon punch, that means you can never jump on that person. Okay, but what if you're a game that allows you to manipulate your air movement? Let's say, I want to know what game. I mean, actually, what you call it? Persona. You're able to alter your air movement, so there's that. Also, again, there's air blocking that exists, like Phantom Breaker. There's air blocking. Or then there's also just defend parry mechanics and whatnot. Like, he's looking at scenario as such a binary from a Street Fighter lens, which, yes, from Street Fighter lens, having a button dragon punch, that will be absurd. But then that's where, instead of design the game Street Fighter, you design it as something else. You design it like Blade Strangers, which does do button specials. And how they handle that is, well, they made sure DPs, none of those games DPs are invulnerable. They're just very fast attacks. So the benefit of using them is they're very fast, have to beat people jumping. But as anti-airs, they're actually not the strongest or best in that regard. Like, you design around that. And that's what I'm seeing from Qmanchu's view, where basically he's looking at the lens of, I see fighting games only as this, and because we do fighting games like that, that's sorry. Before I go further, like, he highlights the issue of like, how Honda Bison, and he basically said how the charged characters basically became either much stronger because they're now motion inputs or in modern mode, or he lost some of the player expression because of how they basically change characters to accommodate a modern mode. And to me, basically my point is, these are all Street Fighter 6 problems, but he doesn't frame his video, this is the problem of Street Fighter 6. He said, no, this is the problem of fighting games. And that's where my personal passion is at. We need to get out of looking at fighting as a monolith for only Street Fighter 6 design. It's like how people kept saying, like right now, people who says the dark age of fighting games. Well, actually, a lot of people say, well, no, there was no dark age of fighting games. It was just, there was no Capcom fighting games that were being released. But there were other fighting games, but they keep calling it the dark age of fighting games. And that's the thing that I'm resonating with this video. That even though I like this person's talking point, he's still viewing things from the lens of, as a Capcom player, if you will.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, where obviously Capcom and Street Fighter, they have the legacy, they have the prestige. You could also even argue the point that out of like a lot of the modern day fighting games, maybe it was Street Fighter 6 that really released as a quote unquote complete package, where, you know, you could still debate about that, but as far as like content rich, quote unquote, it offers like the most. So is it in some ways like a gold standard that you could try to weigh and evaluate and kind of strive to be towards? You could, but it doesn't mean that it is the only gold standard, and like some of the lessons that they take away from it isn't the way to go. So going back to what you're saying about committing to one method, I think that makes a lot of sense. I had to like read back through some of the notes that I was sending you. Yeah, like his whole takeaway that content creator about trying to appease modern controls is taking away from character expression. I don't know if I agree with that so much, because I don't think it's the modern controls that's hurting that more than just like the overall system mechanics.
Absolutely.
What I was telling you was, for people, like for everyone who loves Street Fighter 6, there's people like me who feels that a lot of these characters feel kind of samey because the overall game plan is samey, with drive rush and drive impact and throw looping and bullying them into the corner. You know, Tekken 8 has a much more bigger problem with its heat mechanics and like just the overall offense pressure that's going on. At the same time, kind of sidestepping the modern controls, I would say like the simple controls in Tekken 8 are very, very useless, where nobody really uses them at all.
Really?
But in general, a lot of casuals are going to say that Tekken is easier to pick up and play and do cool stuff with, even though the move lists in Tekken are so much longer than your 2D fighters, right? And I think that's like a portion of the accessibility that gets kind of lost in there. Like, for every content creator who's done like videos about how hard King of Fighters trials are, and you know, like you see those long combo extensions, like I think that's become a one-note conversation. That's like something that's too easy for people to regurgitate, because there's crazy other game mechanics that people are willing to commit and invest in. So I think it's too easy to just like blame controls on like the accessibility thing. And likewise, there's other things that are getting in the way of character expression. That's true, but I don't know if we can lump it all on just modern controls.
I actually basically agree with what you just said, because the issue of Street Fighter is this is a very rigid and linear game. So characters are made to only play within a certain way. Now, that's not to say that, now to be fair, archetypes has always existed in games and whatnot.
Of course.
But Street Fighter 6 is basically such an extreme version that's why, like as he just said, with E Honda, he missed the potential tick throw and pressure that he could have done to basically exploit proximity guard and a few other tricks. And I still say that is a limitation of the game's design of how they handle Honda, and not necessarily this is the problem of the control schemes and whatnot. Another thing I also want to point out, because there is actually a game that does what Street Fighter does, but already does it better. Already does it better, in my opinion, and that is Fighting EX Layer. Fighting EX Layer. Sorry, they do give you the. I think they call it the. I'm not sure if it's called modern, but I think it's called innovative style. But basically, you have the option to do traditional input and just a regular game input version. And there's no disparity between the two. It's just one works one way and one works the other way. And that game has done it better, as far as I'm concerned, because it seems like it did its job of making sure each game is. Sorry, not game. It makes sure that each control is designed with the characters like tool sets in mind and whatnot. Or even better, there's even some pros and cons between the style. Because Fighting EX Layer does have dashing, but most specials are forward and a dash, you basically... Alright, to have the button special, basically you kind of lose the ability to play a precise footsie game where you move back and forth, because if you want to move back and forth and then try to use a poke button, you may buffer in a special, as opposed to, okay, well, when you do command input, you won't lose the ability to do like your footsie gameplay, but now you have more executional demand of doing reversals, because the window for the reversals are much more not harder, but much more tighter, as opposed to just doing it with the button special commands. And for the most part, so it basically puts itself in a position where both styles can be used, and it's kind of done sensibly. That I'm like, this game just does it overall better. And even then, the game doesn't sell you on using modern or is traditional style. It sells you on, here are the different Goiki systems and whatnot, the different basically sub mechanics and whatnot. So that's why the reason why I just kind of look at Street Fighter 6 was just some like scrutiny, because it's like you already had your other people do it better than you, and yet you're still doing this half-ass way of trying to introduce modern controls to people to play.
Yeah, I had a couple other thoughts on like how I would prefer modern controls to be, but I think that's probably safe for a different conversation where we go more in depth on that versus talking about the contents of this Qmanchu's video. So watching the clock here, Keobastein, was there anything else that you wanted to get into the nitty-gritty on this video in particular?
I don't think there's any more nitty-gritty. I may want to take some more time to maybe think on that, but I think maybe what I want to say is my final takeaway with this particular video is the fact that we need to be willing to step away from what is the traditional, which that's kind of something we've been beating the drum up, but this is a consequence of what we have right now, where like even right now when he even mentions the other game he likes to play is also once again a Capcom game, and Ultra Marvel Capcom does essentially half-ass way of, let's say less intuitive way of introducing an accessible controls. And I feel this is the case because this is Capcom trying to have their cake and eat it too, where I believe it's better to just, again, commit to something and then just do either a better onboarding or do other techniques to make sure people don't have too much trouble with executing game. If you're going to do traditional input, maybe keep your mindful of how you do inputs. Do maybe only quarter circles, double downs, and whatnot. If you double down inputs and whatnot. Like, don't let your controls get so complex and whatnot. And if you are going to do button specials, well, keep in mind that people should be able to do these commands on command, and there shouldn't be any overlap with, if anything, other buttons. Because maybe that is my only criticism towards Fighting EX Layer. It's a minor criticism, but Fighting EX Layer does have the issue of moves overlapping with each other and whatnot, because they have all the different level versions instead of a dedicated special button, if you will. But
and I guess like that's why it's important, going back to your main point about committing to one version, because I think with that there's also, I didn't even think about it, there's a distinction between simplified controls and modern controls, right? Because it's in this conversation about traditional versus modern, where you have all those sacrifices, versus if you have a game that just has simplified inputs. I know you have your favorites that you listed before, but one that comes to mind is Power Rangers Battle for the Grid. You know, like simplified inputs, just like Smash inputs, right? But I mean, out of all the fighting games that have come out recently, I have a hard time thinking of a game that has more touch of death combos than that game. You can do some legit degenerate stuff in there, and like very complex and complicated combo routes where there's a ton of character expression in that. So I don't think the control scheme is an issue in that. But again, there's no modern versus traditional fighting at odds with each other in that game. It's all simplified inputs.
Yeah, it all simplified inputs, and they still even have some of their even techniques such as the plinking dash and card cancel. They still have that in there, which again, you don't need that to even. You don't even really need those at intermediate level. At advanced level, they're not mandatory, but it definitely gives you an edge in competition. So yeah, but actually there is one more thing I do want to say as a final standpoint. That other person was saying, which, dang it was just on my mind, but now it's kind of slipping. Give me a second.
No problem.
Because I think it was related to. I might, I think I'm going to go ahead and maybe go ahead. Yeah, but I'll wrap that up. That other talking point, I will probably just get back to it when I think I can think about it.
Sure. You can always edit it in later.
Yeah, I think that's how it's possible. So yeah, hey everyone, thank you for taking the time to hang out with us. We do appreciate it. CommDao, where can people find you?
They can catch me on Twitch at CommDao.
Nice. We appreciate it. And you can follow Keobastein on his YouTube channel, which I believe it's just called Keobastein. So you should be good on that front. But in the meantime, everybody stay frosty, stay cool, and have a great day.
All right. Take care, people.